Girl here with Free to Feed. I cannot tell you how very excited I am to introduce you to Jennifer Black. We are honored to have her join the team. And I can say from my own experiences interacting with Jennifer and learning more about her work, I am over the moon to have her as a tool in our toolbox to help parents. Essentially, what I really love, Jennifer, about what you're bringing to the team is not only your background as an IBCLC, but then you took that so many steps further and have added so many additional specialties on top of that and additional educational necessities, really, for like helping parents in a well-rounded, holistic way, mom and baby, parent and baby, the family, really, if you will. And so with that, I would love to hear if you could introduce yourself, tell us about your background, tell us about your personal background too, because that's important as it relates to our Free to Feed community as well.
Yeah. So I kind of do all of the things. And a lot of these passions that I have came from my own experiences. I have 5 kiddos, so lots of different backgrounds with pumping, with breastfeeding, lots of different challenges. So this kind of led me to add on to the things I was doing a lot of continuing education for. With the training that I have, I am a board certified lactation consultant. I got my start in public health, so I've seen that side of things. I've worked inpatient, outpatient, private practice, lots of just different experiences. And then I kind of found little areas within that I also really wanted to specialize in. Tongue ties and lip ties are my jam. That is something that my kiddos have had issues with. So that led me to say, let's learn a lot more about this. And then weight gain concerns, milk production concerns, also LGBTQIA issues, including induced lactation. And that is not only for our cisgender families, but also our trans families and everything in between. In addition to those, I also have come to, learn a lot more about food allergies because I have multiple kiddos that have had food allergies. And some of my kiddos are older and we did not have these kind of resources back then. I wish we did, but it was a lot of the providers saying, really, what to tell you? And we still have some food allergies in the household. 3 of us have celiac. So this is something I still live every single day. And it's really nice that families have this resource now. Some other trainings that I have, I am a doula. I'm also a certified passenger safety technician, so I can do the fun car seat checks because that's a big thing for families is how do I do this? And I have a bachelor's in science of maternal child health. Let's see, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, and I'm a Omaha certified childbirth educator.
That is absolutely incredible. And thank you for just listing out all of those different specialties. And thank you for the vital work that you do. Legitimately hearing all of the incredible things that like you have continued to learn about and have made important to you makes me almost feel like I'm like, maybe I'm having a baby. Maybe I have one more baby. I'm not, no more babies for me, but almost, because I'm like, oh, if only I lived closer to Jennifer, like all my questions could get answered. So thank you for that. And I love like when you and I have talked about the fact that like as parents, we really do need all these things, right? And oftentimes it is so scattered, right? Of like, I'm going to get this information here and this information here and that information here. And that can be hard. That can be super hard. Accessibility and affordability, and just there's a lot there it entails. And I really love the fact that as you've continued your education there, it continues to show me that with these parents, it's very common for me to hear things like I didn't know, I don't know what the tool is supposed to look like. I don't know what an oral tether looks like. And I love hearing that because like, I get it. And also it would be weird if you did. Like, it would be more strange if like you are a first time parent, you've never dealt with oral tethers before, and you're like, I know exactly what a tongue tie is. Like, I would be more surprised then. And that is the exception, not the rule. And it's totally okay that you don't know all those things. And even someone who is in the specialty of infant feeding and infant health and, child parent dyads, like those individuals still need additional training to get these like little piecemeal things about our journeys because they're nuanced and complicated, all of them. So thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it. And I'd love to dig a little bit deeper and talk more about first the professional side of your journey. So you have 5 kiddos, so professional slash, I guess, personal in here. You have 5 kiddos. Have you been an IBCLC? Like, was it partway through 5 kiddos? Was it after 5 kiddos that you were like, I'm going to do this thing?
So I started after my third child. That's when I started the process because it does take a lot to become an IBCLC. There are college level classes that you have to have, and those aren't something you go for one semester. These are multiple semesters. It's kind of funny. I actually ended up getting 2 other associate degrees while I was working on getting those classes. Psychology and sociology are also another passion of mine. And then you have to have 1,000 clinical hours. These are a lot of hours, as well as 90 hours specific lactation training. So I started after my third kiddo, but I did not actually take my boards until after my 5th kiddo. And I was supposed to take my boards about a month after my kiddo was born. But guess what? He had a tongue tie, he had a lip tie, he had lots of issues going on. So I delayed that. So I was like in the throes of it. Now, what made me decide to do that after my third kiddo is my first 2 kids, my youngest, there just was not a lot of resources. She's almost 17. We didn't have these types of things back then. I had no idea what I was doing. And so I didn't meet my goals. Now, my second kiddo had a lot of issues. We come to find out later there were food allergies, there were oral tethers, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So I didn't meet my goals that time. Now, with my third, I had a good support system. I had different support groups. I had different online groups. I had different professional resources, people I was going to getting help. And oh my gosh, I rested 7 times longer with that support. And I was like, it really does make a difference. And we need more of this support because there are less than 15,000 IBCLCs for the entire country. That is not enough. We need so many more. So that's kind of how my journey went there.
Got it. Got it. And I think that that's so incredibly helpful to put into perspective exactly how, frankly, arduous becoming an IBCLC is. It is a boatload of work. It takes a lot of courses, a lot of hours, a lot of time. The examination is nothing to sneeze at. It is a lot of work. So I want to thank you for like putting really like sharing that piece of it too, because oftentimes I see this in, like the business world too. Oftentimes we see like the end shiny, like, oh yay, they succeeded, look at them, they're amazing. And less of the like process that it took to get there. So that is super helpful to know too, especially for anybody who might be listening to this, like, yeah, I want to be one of those people. I want to increase the numbers. I want to increase accessibility. I want to be an IBCLC or at least like start that process. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So I would love to dig a little bit deeper as it relates to like, you've had 5 very different journeys, and along those journeys, you've had this like increasing amount of resources, support, help, education, all of those fun things, and have seen the impact on like your feeding journey, being able to reach your goals, all of that fun stuff. It is interesting to me then when some of our families get to us and they're like on their second baby, third baby, fourth baby, and they're like, I like, this baby, this is my third, and they have these symptoms, and I feel pretty confident that like my first child probably had this issue too. And there's a lot of guilt and shame, and there's a lot of feelings around like doing what we could with the information that we had at the time, like kind of mixed in there. And I very similarly have those feelings too. The diagnostic codes for these types of food allergies for kiddos came out in between my babies. So my oldest is 8 and born in 2015. In 2017, we saw these diagnostic codes come out for allergic procticulitis and FTIs and all of that. And then my next baby was born in 2018. Different journeys. Obviously, I also started a whole company over the shenanigans. So enough guilt, shame, and also like, yeah, frustration, I guess, to start an entire company over it. I would love to hear your thoughts or maybe some words of wisdom for those parents who are navigating like those feelings. Obviously, top recommendation is seek professional help and like work through those feelings. Outside of that, and that, what are some other like thoughts and how you've navigated that?
So the one thing to remember is you can't change the past, and you can only know, when you know better, you do better. You've heard that saying 1,000 times. And a good example of this is I look back at car seat pictures from my oldest, and oh my gosh, it's not doing it right. But guess what? I can't beat myself up. I didn't know there weren't as many resources. Now I know. Now I'm a car seat tech. So what I really want families to know is don't beat yourself up over that, because we are continually learning, not only as parents, but as professionals. Mm-hmm. So even if you had reached out and said, hey, I'm having these issues, you might not have had good guidance. So the what ifs, kind of leave those behind and just focus on moving forward. Awesome. It's hard to be objective when it's your own kiddo. It's hard to look at these things. Some of my patients are GI doctors. Some of my patients are pediatricians. Some of my patients are dentists, and they're having these issues. A really good example of this is my 5th kiddo had all of the oral tethers going on, and I was in that new parent stage. I could, you're not sleeping, you have all this stuff going on. I called some of my friends that were lactation consultants crying. I was like, I think I forgot how to breastfeed. It hurts and I don't know what's happening. I forgot what a good latch is supposed to look like. Mind you, I have done this before, and I am about to take my boards. It is just so hard to look at things objectively during that time of your life.
Yes, I love that perspective. We're literally, I mean it when I say we're in the trenches. We are in the trenches, that we are sleep deprived. It is foggy. Things aren't clear. And then when things potentially become more clear later, it's then hard and not helpful often to look back on those things with anything other than grace and kind eyes, essentially, or even learning mindset. Okay, what can I do a little bit differently next time to maybe set myself up for success, because I know that crazy journey is coming or likely coming. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And what is fascinating too, and what you mentioned is that you also, and it's important to note, you also may not have been supported the way that you needed to. So you may have done a lot of the work, the advocacy, the pushing, and continued to hit barrier after barrier, obstacle after obstacle. And that also is not your fault. And there's so much work that needs to be done to fix that issue too. And I hear that in my messaging with families all the time of yeah, I did this because I was told that. And guilty too. Even as, I was about to finish my PhD in cellular molecular biology. And my whole focus was protein analysis as a grad student. And in the trenches, in the hospital with this baby who's bleeding profusely, who's covered in eczema, I haven't slept in forever, and pumping in a stairwell, it's bonkers. And they say something that you eat is going to be in your breast for 2 weeks. Nothing in my mind threw up any red flags to be is that true? Is that, maybe you should go look. Maybe you should go look at the research. Maybe you should go double check and make sure that's true. I just took it at face value and was okay, I have to pump like a mad woman for 2 weeks. I have to get rid of that milk because it's no good. And if I have an accidental slip, it's going to be the end of the world. Okay, we're going to buckle up and do this, which is not actually the case. So anybody who's listening, that is not the case on the molecular side of things, and we know that. And if I had looked at the research that I have very readily accessible to back then, I would have known, oh, actually it transfers and clears very quickly, typically within a day. That completely changes my journey. I will not pump like a mad woman for 2 weeks and then hope that baby comes back to the breast. And I did that too. Literally not a scientist and didn't question it for a moment. And my whole job is to question things and be annoying. So didn't do that. Very similar. And so as we're looking at like obstacles to our feeding journeys and things that need to continue to improve, that we can continue to work towards more accessibility for, I want to talk also, you mentioned the LGBTQIA plus community and being accessible for them as well. And I find their journeys, one, it's not uncommon when they do reach us that they have had these obstacles in front of them of trying to find care that will accept them, that will help them, that is proper for them. And also that their journeys typically are more nuanced. And so they have an additional obstacle. An example of that will be for us, we've worked with several families where we have 2 lactating parents. And so now our Venn diagram just got way more complicated because we have parents and any of their food reactivity issues, right? Are they celiac? Do they have food sensitivity? Do they have IBD? We have baby, and we know they have food sensitivity issues. We're navigating that, figuring out what their triggers are. And then we add in the additional Venn diagram of like another person also lactating, also has their own things, right? And now everybody has to get in sync with all of the elimination diet, the lactating, all of that stuff. And we absolutely have done it several times. And my mind is blown by these families that are just absolutely incredible. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. So I would love to hear from you on like your thoughts on the lactating community and some of your experiences as it relates to the LGBTQIA+.
So one thing I'll also say is, sometimes it's a barrier trying to find that good care, but sometimes there's a fear of reaching out for care because you don't know what is a safe space. Where can I go that is going to be a safe space for me? So that's where, I love that Free to Feed is very transparent. Like, we are a safe space. You will have the care, respect that you deserve. And, some of the other things are when we're looking at each parent as an individual, sometimes they have different things going on. Sometimes one is home most of the day. So the foods that we're looking at are foods in the house. One might be traveling for work, might not be able to pack food from home. So now we're also talking about, okay, when you're out and about, these are some foods that you might be able to have. So it's looking at anybody that's involved as an individual person, which again is so important to provide that individualized care, not just kind of a blanket, like, here you go, here's some resources, which I love with Free to Feed.
I appreciate that. And I agree wholeheartedly. As an IBCLC, I can imagine that the additional like nuance to work with families who may have more than one lactating parent or maybe like inducing lactation, things like that, would be now you're working through like 2 different latches, right? You have like, we have, 4 different like nipples that we are working with because
Yes.
I don't, even in my own body, I have 2 very different situations going on either side. And latch is different. Everything was different about either side of my own body, let alone now adding in 2 additional situations and stuff. So I would love, is there anything else for any professionals that may be listening that you'd love to share of like, these are some of the additional considerations that I keep in mind on like the IBCLC side of things?
So when we, I'll kind of go back to tongue ties because again, that's, one of my things. So with tongue tie, it can present a lot of different ways. For some people, they're having pain with latching, bleeding, cracking nipples, but baby's able to get enough milk. For some families, it's that baby can't get that milk. The parent doesn't have any discomfort, but baby's not able to transfer efficiently, and lots of different things in between. So those are just some examples. So if we have two parents, they might be experiencing different things. One might have the bleeding, cracking, pain. The other one might have low milk supply because baby is not transferring well. And it can be based on the milk flow rate. It can be based on the nipple shape size, the latching positions, things like that. Sometimes we have babies with some tightening in their neck, their face, their jaw, and they do better in one position versus the other. So we might have one parent who says, I really love football hold, I'm having tons of pain. And then the other parent's doing cross cradle. It's like, I'm fine. It doesn't hurt. And it could be that tightening. So again, I really urge people to look at things very thoroughly. That's one thing about me is I will leave no stone unturned. And a lot of times we're peeling back the layers because yes, sometimes there's only one issue, but a lot of times there's multiple things going on. And we have to figure out what they all are and address every single one of those.
Yes, yes, yes. And like foot stomp on that point too, that like some of us are just so very lucky that there's a list of things that we're navigating, and oftentimes, you know, we don't really understand. And again, it would be weird if we did really understand like all of the things that can be going on for our little. And I know that I didn't when I had my oldest. Like I had no concept of like, oh, because she was breached, this is why we likely had X, Y, and Z problems. Because she has oral tethers, this is why my nipples were bleeding and I cried every time she latched. But, you know, no idea in that time. In addition to, we also had food allergies. And for us, the food allergy symptoms became so egregious and so all consuming that the rest of it just like fell to the wayside. Again, largely because it was at the time my own detriment versus her detriment, right? So it was like me being in pain and discomfort and stuff versus her. And I was 100% of the mindset of like, just please fix my baby, help my baby, like my nipples, whatever, just let's make sure that my baby is okay. And it isn't uncommon for us to have that situation where there is more than one, and we have to navigate all of the above. Because on the food allergy side of things, what I often see with these families is that we start to get really confused about what's food reactivity when we haven't addressed these other issues, right? If you have really poor latch, for example, and baby's bringing in too much air, they're really gassy, their stool's a little funky, they're refluxy because of all of the gas, that you may confuse this latch issue with food reactivity and be like, oh, it must be peanuts because I brought back peanuts and I saw this issue. But in reality, it's that we don't have a consistent good latch. And so they're all intertwined and messy and nuanced. And to have somebody that is willing and able to like paw through that with you and say like, okay, let's like next level, let's continue to talk about this. And also to like understand fully that there are different bodies going on, right? That like got baby's body and what is happening in their body, and we have parents' body and what's going on in their body. Oftentimes completely separate issues that we're navigating, still just as important. And so very, very important to work with somebody who's looking at both. And unfortunately, that's not the way our medical system's set up in the United States. It is not set up for here's the dyad, how do we treat them together? How do we work with them together? How do we see them as individuals and then as a group? And we have completely different specialists, completely different doctors. And on the food allergy side, the additional struggle that we have is that there also isn't a perfect person in the medical field side that works with these families who have specifically non-IgE mediated food allergies, right? It seems like we have our like pediatricians, which are basically the triage, like this is where you need to go. They know a little about everything so that they can properly refer out all that stuff. And then we have the allergist, which is a specialist in like the life-threatening food allergies, the IgE-mediated food allergies of the world. We have the GI, which I want to then here dive a little bit into like your journey, because you said you have 3 people in your family with celiac. So we have the GI side of the story, which then can say like, yeah, I deal with, GI disturbances, but not that kind, because it's the immune system that's responding. So I can't really help you. And then we're just in the middle with no actual help. So I would love to talk about, so for any parents who are listening are like, oh my gosh, yes, that's what we did. We just are ping ponging. And everybody tells me a little bit of a different journey, a little bit of a different story, and I don't know where to go from here. Which is what then became the birth of Free to Feed. When you are looking at your own journeys, can you tell us a little bit more about like the process of the celiac diagnosis? I'm sure it was different for all 3. Tell us a little bit more, if you don't mind, about your journey there.
And one thing I want to point out about just the medical field as a whole is you learn stuff in school, of course. Some things you have a lot more education on than others. I can't tell you how many pediatricians, how many nurses are my patients. And they're like, we had a 30-minute lecture on this. That's what we had. But in the medical field, things are always changing. There's new studies coming out. There's new things coming out. And it is impossible to keep up with everything. So this is where sometimes, especially for infant and kiddo feeding, issues or allergies, the doctor may have learned about it 20 years ago, 10 years ago. But guess what? That information is now outdated if they haven't done continuing education and that very specific topic. So yes. I mean, even for me as a lactation consultant, do I know everything about everything? Absolutely not. Am I trying to know as much as I possibly can? Yes. Now, for the things I specialize in, am I like constantly hunting down new stuff? Yes, absolutely. So I did just want to kind of throw that in there. So my journey with my first kiddo that had celiac, when she started solids, she started having diarrhea and had diarrhea, and she was older. We had so many different feeding issues. So this was around 11, 12 months of age, just diarrhea, 4 weeks. Finally got the GI referral. And when I say diarrhea, this I could smell. So she was napping in another room. I could smell it down the hallway. It was so bad. I was like, there is something not right here. So we went to the GI doctor. They said, oh, well, it's toddler diarrhea. You need to feed fattier foods. And I said, okay, what are you talking about? So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, peanut butter, avocado, like these healthier foods. He said, no, French fries, things like that. Telling me to feed my right around 1-year-old French fries. Yes. I was like, does not sit right with me. Luckily, I had a good friend who actually had celiac. Like, this sounds a lot like celiac. Immediately stopped giving her gluten. And guess what? It went away within days. My journey was a little bit different. I was having a lot of GI issues, brain fog, just all these things going on. So my doctor was like, well, you have a kiddo with celiac. Maybe we should check you. So they did the lab work and it came back that yes. And I said, well, what else can we do? And they said, well, there's a genetic test we can do to see if you have the gene that kind of predisposes you to that. And that came back as, yes, you probably have celiac. And I said, well, what else can we do? They're like, well, we can do a biopsy. So they did the biopsy and she was finally like, Jennifer, you have celiac. In my head, I'm like, my daughter had been living gluten-free. So I knew kind of the ins and outs of it, but I feel like because I had known gluten that I was being a little bit more stubborn there. And I will say though, that the options as gluten-free, so much better now than they were a decade ago. Finding gluten-free foods So much different. We used to go out to eat, and my poor daughter, she would only be able to have fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and meat that was not seasoned because we didn't know what was safe on the menu. Now you can go to lots of places and it says on the menu, it's got a little gluten-free. I'm like, this is amazing. And then now there's just a lot more known about it. So if there's not anything labeled gluten-free, a lot of times you can ask, and guess what? The chef knows what gluten is. They actually know what that is and are able to say, yes, I can omit this, I can omit that, and we will be fine.
Oh man. Yes. As well as the above. So I like to talk when I usually talk to parents. I love telling them, like, we know that when you're consuming things that elicit you a response in your body, we have research to show that that does impact your transferability to the breast. And so when you're in a food allergy journey with a kiddo is oftentimes when you find out that you have issues as well. And so a few of the things that, like, as I'm talking to parents, we talk about is like, one, I get it. Like, I will remove pasta from my life all day, every day for my children. No questions asked. For me, I don't want to. And so, like, I get that, like, in my soul, it makes my day that you were like, well, what else? Like, what else can we look at? And for anybody listening who's like, okay, but like, back up 3 steps. What in the world did you do? Because you just basically outlined like 3 different ways of diagnosis for celiac that people may not know a whole lot about. And so really common ways that we can diagnose celiac. Yes, celiac can be diagnosed if you're in the midst of this and they're like, oh, yeah, there's nothing we can do for your kiddo. Blood work is very, very common. They're looking for a specific biomarker in your blood panel. Stool is sometimes one that they'll test as well. Also looking for that similar biomarker in your stool sample. That's a sample stool test that I've done in the lab, even not on myself, but anyway, maybe I should. And then another that you mentioned was the genetic testing. So we can be genetically predisposed to having celiac, and that's something that we can pass down to our kiddos. And then the last one that you mentioned was sounds like a colonoscopy for a biopsy, which is an endeavor. I have had a colonoscopy. My husband has ulcerative colitis, so he has them on the regular. Not happy fun times. So I know that you were like all in when you were like, no, I will go get a colonoscopy so that we can prove that this is in fact the problem. And that's usually like the gold standard, if you will, the like last marker of like, yeah, this is for sure. I will say it's really interesting. Some families that I've worked with have struggled to get the diagnosis unless they've had the biopsy. Like, they can have all the other things be like blatantly flashing, yes, this is absolutely the thing, and they're not prepared, they're not ready, understandably, to put their child under for a colonoscopy, and so they can't get the diagnosis, which I will say is frustrating, and can be frustrating for those families who are like, yeah, but I need like a note for school or similar. So do you mind if I ask who your third is? So we said your oldest, yourself, and then who's your third?
And the other thing about celiac is it can develop it. You can start to show symptoms at any point of your life. So it's actually my son. And we found out probably about 1.5 years ago, and he's almost 10. He didn't show any signs of having issues with gluten when we started having a lot of GI issues. And, first it was like, we'll eliminate this, see how things go, eliminate this, see how things go. And nothing was really working. So I said, well, can we go ahead and do the blood test? We did the blood test, came back, yep. Luckily, I have a really good pediatrician that was like, this is sufficient enough. But a lot of times what you can do, because my pediatrician, for example, was different with my older kiddo way back in the day, is we were not able to get any of that done because I just kind of took it upon myself to say, okay, we're going to eliminate gluten. So by the time we would have done any testing, it wouldn't have shown some of these reactions. So I was able to get a letter saying, gluten intolerant. They wouldn't put that label on there just yet at that time. So I was able to get the gluten intolerant. So we were able to get those specialized meals, things
Mhm.
along those lines. So yeah.
Perfect. That's super, super helpful. Thank you for that extra tip. Um, and you're right. That's another really important thing as we're talking about like diagnostics for celiac is that celiac is one of the few types of these style of reactivities where you have to be actively reactive. Your body has to be actively responding to gluten or have had responded to gluten fairly recently in order for our test to become positive. So like that marker is only showing when your body is reactive to gluten. So if you do your due diligence and go and say like, okay, I'm going to remove meat, and then you're like, I'm going to get a diagnosis, and they're going to test, and it's going to come back oftentimes negative, and then you're like, but it seems, and so we literally have to eat the thing that causes us the discomfort in order to get the diagnosis, which here's to better options in the future. But that's all the way to like the colonoscopy too, like that's all the way through the testing for celiac outside of the genetic testing. You can see if you're predisposed, but again, that's not a diagnosis. That's just you have a higher chance of having this problem. And I also appreciate that you mentioned that this can be onset at any time, because that is confusing, right? And that's the same for all types of like food reactivity, from celiac to IgE-mediated food allergies to FPIEs. It is less common that it'll happen on day one of like baby's born and like, boom, we have our first reaction. Does that happen? Yes, absolutely. I have a ton of families that I work with that they're like, boom, on day one, I saw the reactions. And it's more often than not, it's the parents who have already like been on through this rodeo once and they already know all the things to look for. Um, but it can happen on day one. It's more often that we don't see the first symptom onset until month 2, 3. Like that I find is the most common time frame. And what a smack in the face. Like you are dealing with all these other things. Like you're like, I got the oral tethers fixed and I got my latch fixed and I got this body work done. And like, I finally feel like we're on the right track and things are going well. My supply is, on a good rate. Like things are going really well. And then bam, like you hit this wall of food reactivity and you're like, I didn't change my diet. Nothing's new. Things are fine. I'm finally not, my nipples aren't bleeding finally. And now what is this crap? And that's so confusing for families. And oftentimes then, of course, we look for like other problems where we're like, okay, well, it's a skin issue. So it's got to be that like it's summertime. And maybe, but definitely not that it's summertime and now your baby also has bloody stools. And so that's one thing I really want to make sure everybody hears and understand is that like you can have an onset of something like this anywhere from day one to year 100 plus. The most common is in the first year, about 80%, at least for food reactivity, for IgE, non-IgE happens within that first year. But the like average is month 3, month 2, month 3. So that's hard. That's so hard to navigate. And I hear that often, like, I didn't do anything different. Like, why is now the problem? And it does feel like, well, it's because we finally got to like take off our trading wheels, and now here we are. Um, so your family is already like really in the trenches, in the deep like ingredient deck reading, like knowing how to communicate with people at restaurants, like all of those things that are really important on the food allergy side of things. And yes, I also like completely agree. The food allergy and alternative foods market, it is nothing like it was before. It was just like, I feel like it was just really starting when my oldest was born. So like 8 years ago, like feels like Enjoy Life was just starting to come. Like some of the first foods and food companies that were like, hey, we're going to cater to those with food allergies. We're just starting to come to the scene. And now there's, like that aisle or that section in every
Yeah.
store I go to, and it's just amazing and I love it. And I also want to mention that it still needs improvement and it's still so expensive. And that is even more so right now with inflation. These alternative foods are bonkers expensive. You're looking at a regular loaf of bread maybe being a few dollars versus like the bread that you're getting for some reason is like this big instead of this big and it costs like 10 times as much. So
Yes. Yes. Now, I will say, one other thing, just like you touched on, we used to have to go to like specialty stores, but now there's so many more options. I mean, you can go to Walmart, you can go to Target. The prices have gotten better than they were, but they are still drastically different.
Yep. And I will say some of the, it's funny, maybe not funny, haha. It's funny looking at some of the benefits that like have come of these journeys, especially like in my case, I started gardening because of my oldest food allergy journey. Because I was like, okay, I'm gonna need to learn how to grow food or something, like because money doesn't grow on trees, but bell peppers sort of do. So, and I need lots of them. And so that was like the beginning of me learning how to garden, and now it's like a hobby of mine. It's something that I actually enjoy. I've learned a lot, and I made lots of mistakes still. Similar to that, like now knowing so much more about our food, about food sources, about processing, and then in all of the irony in the world, I worked at a dairy processing facility for a few years as a quality manager, and like mind blowing the things that I learned there about labels and requirements or lack thereof. So it's really fascinating. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, since we're talking about like alternative foods and celiac with gluten, is that it's important for families to know that when we're talking about the US, especially, the labeling requirements only have a actual threshold requirement for gluten when it says gluten-free, and it does. We in the United States do not have any threshold requirement for any of the other labels: dairy-free, soy-free, corn-free, wheat-free. In order for it to say gluten-free, I want to say it's 20 parts per million is what I think I last saw. So there's an actual threshold. Like it cannot be anything above this threshold amount of gluten in this product in order for it to be labeled gluten-free. And that's an audited part of like the whole system for food processing. There is nothing. There's no threshold for the rest of those labels, which is so frustrating because you can then have families who are like, yeah, I have a little one, even with a top allergen that's, has a peanut allergy, has a soy allergy, and the label can say soy free and still use soy derivative products, still have soy oil in it. And even the FDA has come out with research that says, yeah, stuff with soy oil and soy lecithin have fragments of proteins that can elicit an allergic response in a person, but you can still label it as soy free. So if you're listening to this and your like jaw just hit the floor, I'm sorry to be the burden of bad news. We have really great resources for like digging in and seeing if you have something like soy in your diet unintentionally. So mention of that of like another thing that yes, prices could improve and like yes, it has gotten better. Also, here's to like labeling continuing to improve, get better for us, because that will be helpful for all of our journeys. I'd love to take like a little bit of a shift, and with your like background that you have now, right? So in the peeling back of the layers and whatnot, when people meet with you and get to work through like a consultation with you, one, you're very, very experienced in virtual, which is a huge like benefit to Free to Feed because that's our bread and butter. Um, so tell us a little bit about your experience as it relates to like, I'm as a parent mentally thinking about like, how is Jennifer checking my baby for oral tethers when she's on the other side of the country? And so tell me a little bit more about like your experience, that like transition even, and how things are going on that realm.
So I have completed over 2,400 virtual lactation consults.
That's amazing.
Yes. And so with that, I have seen families from all over the country, which again really helps because I'm not looking at, okay, what's going on in my specific geographical location. I'm able to see what's happening all over the United States. It was kind of funny when I first started out as doing telehealth, and I remember going through an interview one time, like, are you going to be able to do lactation consults without touching baby, being hands-on? Well, when I first got my start a long time ago, before it was lactation consult, and I first started working in public health, my job consisted of phone calls. I was calling, and that's how my job was to provide care through calls. And I'm like, you mean I'm going to be able to see the person? No problem. No problem. But even as a lactation consultant, when I'm doing home visits, when I'm in person, I am still not super hands-on. I personally, and again, there's a lot of different opinions on this, I find that if we're maneuvering and moving baby for the parent, sometimes when we're gone, the parent doesn't have that muscle memory of how to do it. So I am very good at just kind of counseling. And yes, I might demonstrate. I have my lovely baby. So yes, I might demonstrate, but it's really about the parent learning how to do things on their own. So when I'm not there, they can replicate that. Now, as far as tongue ties, lip ties, the way that I assess this in person is I do what I need to do in baby's mouth, but then I let the parent go back home and I walk the parent through, this is what I'm feeling. Are you feeling this? This is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing this? So I can make sure we're on the same page. Part of the reason for that is I don't want parents to ever second guess, did my baby really have a tongue tie? Was this procedure needed? I want you to know, whether it's in person or virtual, this is what we're seeing with your baby. This is what we would expect to be seeing with a baby that does not have any oral tethers. So I want parents to have that confidence, have that peace of mind of yes, there is, or no, there's not. Sometimes there's a gray area where there's other things going on that we have to work on, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So there are parts of the consult virtually that we're looking at things together. Cell phones are easily maneuverable, have the Zoom, doing all the things. And I'll say, this is what I'm seeing, just to make sure that everything's translating through the video. There's not a shadow from, somewhere that's making things look a little bit different. And then I'm walking through parents. Okay, this is what you should be feeling. Is this what you're feeling? And we're looking at all of these things together because a large part of checking for any oral tethers is the functional side of things. Yes, there's a visual side, but we're also checking function. And I have kind of fine-tuned, okay, these are the questions that we need to ask. And sometimes it's how we ask it. Because if you've never stuck your finger in thousands of babies' mouths, you're like, what do you mean by that? When I first started as a lactation consultant, even then, as you're like sticking your finger in baby's mouth, until you've stuck your finger in like 100 babies' mouths, you're like, I don't know what is normal for this age, what is normal for, if this happened at birth, X, Y, Z kind of thing. So asking parents those questions in a way that's going to be easily understandable, and I'm going to be able to get that feedback from them.
I love that. It reminds me, I wholeheartedly relate to when you said, not just like maneuvering the baby for a parent and then being like, okay, that's how you do it, and then leaving. That was my first experience with like lactation, was in the hospital, and this, wonderful woman, but she like grabbed the baby, grabbed the boob, put the baby on the boob, and she's like, that's how you do it. And I was just sitting there like, what was that magic? What was that sorcery that just occurred? And she left, and I was like, all right, you just, no, that's not, I am not able to replicate whatever just happened in this room. And if I had been walked through it, or maybe shown it, like you said, and then walked through it, that would be a different story of like, oh, okay, like I remember Jennifer said this and this and nose and nipple. And I relate so much to that. And then also to the, like, if walking the parent through, right? Like really, you're creating advocates for like oral tethers, for example. On my side, when I'm walking parents through, let's say, like looking at a diaper, right? Like I'm, instead of looking at a diaper picture and saying that is a pass or that is a fail, I'm telling them exactly what I see. Because one, I might see something wrong because yeah, like angles and shadows and I don't know, and it's a three-dimensional thing that I'm looking at one image of. Except for some of my amazing parents that send me like actual videos and I get like a full it's a full picture. Shout out to those. And so I can say, like, you know, I'm looking for, when I'm looking at a diaper and I'm looking at mucus, these are the two things that I'm looking for. This is how I feel about the thing one. This is how I feel about thing two. Here's a picture. I saved your poop and I circled the spot that I am concerned about. What do you see here? Would you agree? And then they can say like, oh, actually, I think it's more like this from, you know, my angle and what I can see. Okay, great. Let's talk about that. Or yeah, that is totally what we see and fabulous, wonderful. And then the next time they're looking at it, the less that they need, right? The more that like they're building those weird skills that I have now after, yeah, not sticking my finger in a bunch of babies' mouths, but sticking my nose in a bunch of babies' diapers, I guess is the analogy to that. I'll work on that one. But I've seen so many diapers that, yeah, like really quickly, I'm gonna be like, yep, that's a pass. Yep, that's a fail. And instead of just like doing that and moving on, actually like educating them. And I think the other thing that that's so powerful for is for not only their next babies, but their friends and family, right? Like they can then go talk to their best friend who just had a baby. Maybe that person is saying, yeah, I'm feeling this, that about, and be able to like, oh, I learned this thing from Jennifer where I stick my finger in their mouth and this is what I learned about it. And maybe you should go see an IBCLC because this is something that I learned from one myself. And that's just kiss.
Yeah.
So, so I appreciate that. We are getting close on time. This has been an amazing conversation. I really, really appreciate it, Jennifer. I want to give you a moment if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you want to discuss or you want to bring up. Is there anything that we didn't put on the table, unintended, that you want to share with our listeners?
The one way that I want people to look at lactation is we also want to look at preventative care. So when we're going to the pediatrician, we're doing well checkups to catch anything that might be an issue in the future. When we're doing our prenatal, we're doing things to, you know, catch issues that might arise in the future. We need that for lactation. It doesn't hurt to see a lactation consultant shortly after you have a baby. And sometimes we catch little issues before they become big issues. Worst case scenario, everything's going smooth. Well, guess what? Now you kind of know, okay, this is all okay. This is all normal. I tell parents, you don't have to know everything about everything when it comes to lactation. Your job is simply to say, hey, I think there's something funky going on. And it's my job to figure out what's going on. The other thing is, again, if we're just keeping up with these preventative cares as we're hitting different ages and stages, we're staying ahead of the game. We're staying ahead of any issues.
I love that. I love that. And I agree wholeheartedly. And we even see that in the food allergy realm, especially when parents have a history of food allergies or they have other kiddos with food allergies where they'll like start out saying, okay, new baby, you know, still got that new baby smell. Let's talk about what are the things I need to keep an eye out for. And maybe things are going absolutely amazing right now. And hopefully everything will continue to be amazing. And you won't need the information that we talk about. However, if you do, having it is so very powerful. So with that, I want to again thank you so much, Jennifer, for jumping on with me, for having this important conversation with me. welcome officially to the team.
Yeah.
We are honored to have you so incredibly much. And for anybody who's listening, first, for me, wherever you are in your journey today, you're doing an amazing job, and I'm so incredibly proud of you. And if you are interested in booking with Jennifer, you can find her at freetofeed.com/consults, and you can book with her right away, and you will be able to meet with her and deep dive into the food allergy side of things, lactation side of things, and oftentimes probably a combination of all of the above. So thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.